is Elena Cross, and the last time I stood in front of my parents' house, the magnolia trees were in bloom. I remember because the petals scattered across the porch like confetti. Too perfect for how ugly that day actually was. "Only family is invited," my mother said. Her voice wasn't raised or trembling. It was flat, like a statement printed on a sign that had been hanging there forever. I laughed at first, certain I'd misheard. "You're joking, right? It's Shea's wedding. I'm her sister." Mom didn't blink. "We're keeping it small, sweetheart. You know how these things get expensive. Shea just wants peace on her day." Peace. That word tasted like rust in my mouth. Behind her, through the open doorway, I saw ribbons hanging from the ceiling fan, flowers stacked along the front hall, waiting to be delivered to the venue. Dad stood beside the fridge, pretending to read a receipt. He's always been good at pretending not to hear things that hurt. "Shea doesn't want me there," I pressed. Mom finally met my eyes. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." That was the sentence that cracked something inside me. Because it wasn't even cruelty. It was administration. Like I was a bill being cancelled, not a daughter being cut out of a family photo. I turned away before they could see the heat rising behind my eyes. "I flew in for this," I said quietly. 8,000 miles. I used my own vacation days. And you're telling me to go back? Mom's answer was a simple, practiced smile. "You'll understand when you have children." It's strange how humiliation can make you forget where you parked. I stood in their driveway for 5 minutes, trying to remember whether I'd left my rental at the curb or by the mailbox. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, I realized I was still holding the wedding gift, a silver locket engraved with both our initials, bought a month earlier, when I still believed love was enough to buy entry into your own family. I drove back to the hotel without crying. You learn that skill when disappointment becomes routine. 3 days later, my mother called. "Elena," she started, her voice syrupy, an octave higher than usual. "You know about the contracts you signed for Shea's vendors?" I froze. "What contracts?" "The ones for the venue, catering, and photographer. You remember, we used your credit for the deposits." Deposits. Right. That word again fluttering in like a housefly. The last time she'd asked for a favor, it was just a small signature. "How much are we talking?" There was a pause only mothers can manufacture. A silence heavy with guilt they expect you to fill. 38,000, she said finally. "The planner says payment is due this week. The cards are in your name, so to avoid complications, it would be best if you paid directly. We'll reimburse you soon, of course." I let out a small laugh that didn't sound human. "You uninvited me," I said. "You told me not to come, Mom. And now you're asking for $38,000. Eleanor, you know how important your sister's happiness is. Don't be vindictive. You were always the practical one." There it was. The oldest manipulation trick in our family manual. Appeal to my decency, right after denying me dignity. I hung up before she finished her next sentence. For the first time in my life, silence felt like justice. But here's the problem with being the family's responsible one. Responsibility is a habit, not a switch. The number kept circling my mind while I tried to sleep. $38,000. If I ignored it, would it destroy my credit? Would a default notice show up at my London address? I replayed her tone, how easily she'd said, "due this week," as though I were their accountant, not their daughter exiled for existing. At 2 a.m., I sat upright in bed. The lamplight pooled across my blanket, like a confession I didn't ask for. I opened my laptop, typed in Cedar Ridge Events LLC, and there it was. The invoice carrying my name, my address, my authorization signature. They'd used my digital sign-off from months ago when I'd agreed to help with some paperwork. I scrolled down the list. Catering, photography, floral design, venue, all with my authorization ID. Panic sparked. Then rage burned over it like varnish. How was it that my generosity, which they had mistaken for weakness, was now being weaponized against me? I closed my laptop and whispered to the empty room, "Not this time." The next morning, I called my bank. I explained that my digital authorization had been applied under misunderstanding. The clerk's tone turned cautious. "Unfortunately, Ms. Cross, since you were the verified signee, the liability rests with you." Of course, paper has no conscience, but I had one, and maybe this time that was the problem. Instead of paying, I decided to wait. 3 days later, on the Monday after the wedding, I got another call. This time, my father's number flashed on the screen. I wasn't going to answer, but curiosity has a way of dragging compassion out, even when you swore it's dead. "Eleanor?" His voice was shaky, out of practice. "Your mother's here too." I said nothing. "You have to help us," he continued. "The payments went through on your card, but they declined our transfer. The venue's threatening legal action. Please, just cover it for now. We'll sort it later." The request was so familiar, it almost felt nostalgic. Something in me snapped cleanly, like a branch that had been bending too long. "I'll think about it," I said. But thinking in that moment meant remembering. Remembering every time I'd cleaned up after their mistakes. Bail for a cousin's car accident in 2017. Mom's emergency roof repair that turned into a luxury spa retreat. The silent birthdays they reimbursed with guilt. While they begged, I stared at the magnolia petals outside my hotel window. By morning, they'd turned brown and dry. Beautiful things that die quietly. Maybe love was like that too. I didn't sleep that night. The phone call replayed on a loop. My father's voice trembling, my mother muttering in the background. The mixture of desperation and entitlement that used to make me give in. This time, something inside me resisted. The sound of begging didn't activate pity anymore. It triggered memory. The sort that stings, not because it hurts now, but because it's proof you allowed it to hurt before. At dawn, I made coffee and stared at my reflection in the hotel mirror. Puffy eyes, hair refusing to stay disciplined. I smiled bitterly. "You look like a debt collector," I told the woman in the glass. Maybe that's what I'd become, chasing repayments no one ever promised to give. My flight back to London wasn't until Wednesday. That left 2 more days in Cedar Valley, the town that raised me, and then politely erased me. Around noon, I drove past Meadow Ridge Barn, the wedding venue. Crews were dismantling decorations, folding chairs, popping balloons. The fairy lights that had once spelled Shea and Colton forever now lay coiled like discarded snakes. I pulled over anyway. One of the staff, a girl barely 20, waved politely. "You at the Caldwell wedding?" she asked. "Elena Cross," I said automatically. Her eyes widened. "Oh," she said, almost whispering. "You're the one on all the invoices." For a moment, the world tilted. The one on all the invoices. That's what I was to them. A line item more than a person. She handed me a printed folder. "The manager said you might come by. You'll need this for your records." Inside was a full breakdown. Food, venue, logistics. And at the bottom, the total amount settled the previous day through my account. The confirmation slip had my initials. The knot in my chest tightened. They hadn't merely begged. They had already used the funds. $38,000. Gone. I called the bank again from the car. This time, fury sharpened my voice enough that the representative transferred me to a legal claims officer. "Were you present when these invoices were paid?" she asked. "No," I said, "but my credentials were used without my consent." Her answer came clean and professional. "You can file a fraud dispute. But since the digital authorization came from your verified device months earlier, It will qualify as internal misuse, not external fraud. Translation: we can't help you. I hung up slowly. My hands weren't shaking, yet my voice had gone calm, like the eye of a storm that knows what follows. Then something almost funny occurred to me. They thought they'd trapped me, but they'd signed contracts too, using my name, my identity, and every vendor's receipt carried that proof. If anyone owed, it was them. That realization spread through me like caffeine. I drove to Cedar County District Office, the same gray building where I renewed my first driver's license at 17. The clerk behind the information desk looked half asleep until I laid the folder down. I need to file a report, I said. Unauthorized financial usage of personal information. Family dispute, yes, I said evenly, but legally still theft. The process was tedious but mechanical. Fill out Form A147, attach invoice copies, sign affidavit. Each signature felt like reclaiming control molecule by molecule. By the time I left, the midday sun had dried the morning dew, and my anger felt less like heat and more like precision. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. Mom! I didn't pick up. 5 missed calls later, a text arrived. We need to meet, please, before things get out of hand. Out of hand. The irony almost made me smile. I replied with one word, tomorrow. The cafe I chose was neutral territory. Not her kitchen, not my battlefield. When I arrived, Mom was already waiting, a pastel scarf draped neatly over her shoulders, her composure arranged like furniture. Elena, honey, she began, reaching for my hand. I didn't give it. I filed a report, I said instead. Her smile faltered. You what? For unauthorized usage of my signature and card details. You and Dad will receive official notice this week. Her perfectly penciled eyebrows arched. You wouldn't dare report your own family. Think about what that does to us. I am thinking, I interrupted. For once, about myself. She exhaled sharply. This is revenge because we didn't invite you, isn't it? The accusation landed precisely the way she wanted. Tight in my chest. Old guilt trying to wake up. But guilt, like any parasite, only lives if fed. No, I said quietly. This is a refund. For the first time, she had no script ready. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the low chatter of strangers who didn't care that a 34-year-old woman was divorcing her parents across the table. You're overreacting, she whispered finally. Overdrafting, I corrected. That's what you did. Her mouth tightened. Your father will talk to you. He can fix this. I'm sure he'll try. But the case number is already logged. I slid a printed copy of the report across to her. The header misuse of authorized signature shone faintly under the cafe light. For a moment, she stared at it. Then, to my quiet astonishment, tears filled her eyes. Elena, we didn't mean harm, she said. It's just been hard. Shea deserves her day. We thought you'd understand. I do understand, I replied. That's why this has to stop now. Her tears trembled, but didn't fall. A performance, not a confession. When I left, I didn't look back. The bell above the cafe door chimed like applause from nowhere. Back in the hotel, guilt tried its old trick, sneaking in under the door. But instead of letting it settle, I called my friend Paula back in London. She listened without interruption, just a low, oh God, every few sentences. Finally, she said, do you realize this isn't just about money? They erased you, and now that you exist again, it scares them. Her words hung there. Erased you. Yes, that's exactly what it felt like. Being edited out of my own story, until the only version of me left was the one footing the bill. That night, I booked an earlier flight home. I would handle the legal and financial chaos from distance. But part of me knew this wasn't over. My parents had spent their lives perfecting denial. They wouldn't face consequence quietly. I closed my suitcase and looked once more at the silver locket, still lying on the table. The engraving read, E+S. I snapped it shut and slipped it into the hotel trash bin. Some symbols, if kept, just rewrite old chapters. 2 days later, I was back in London. Rain greeted me at Heathrow. Not the dramatic downpour of movies, just that quiet drizzle that politely refuses to stop. It matched my mood, calm on the surface, chaos waiting for dry ground. The taxi ride home wound through streets still jet-lagged from Christmas decorations. By the time I reached my flat, I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast in Tennessee. I made tea, sat on the couch, and opened my email. Unread messages blinked like warning signs. One from Cedar Ridge Events. Payment confirmed. Congratulations to the newlyweds. Another from Caldwell Imaging Studios. Invoice finalized. Photos attached. Balance cleared. The evidence of their betrayal now lived in digital carbon copies. And yet, nestled between those corporate receipts was a new message. Subject line, please, let's talk. It was from Shea. I hovered for a second. I hadn't spoken to my sister since before her engagement. We'd been close once. Inseparable twins born 5 years apart. But closeness doesn't survive favoritism. It rots under it. I clicked open the message. Elena, I know everything looks bad. I didn't want this. Mom said you were busy, that London kept you too occupied for family functions. I believed her until yesterday, when Dad told me about the report you filed. Please don't ruin them. They're my parents too. Maybe we can fix this another way. Shea. For 2 minutes, I stared at those words. A mixture of pity and irritation shifting inside me. She was her mother's daughter after all. Fluent in half-truths, allergic to accountability. I wrote back, "You're right, they're your parents too, which means the debt they created belongs equally to all of you." Then I hit send and closed my laptop. When people talk about healing, they make it sound like something soft. A candlelit bath, a journal, a song. But healing, I've learned, is violence you perform inside your own brain, ripping out the roots of guilt that grew too deep. Every morning that week, I went to work at the hospital, charted cases, smiled at patients, and pretended my personal life wasn't a lawsuit away from implosion. Then on Friday, a message arrived from the Tennessee State Attorney's Office, confirming receipt of my complaint. They'd assigned a mediator to review the affidavit. I exhaled for the first time in days. That night, I poured wine and called Paula again. "They're going to panic," she said immediately when I told her. "They already have, or will, once the official letter arrives." She was silent for a moment. "Do you think they'll ever apologize?" "No," I said after a pause. "But I don't need them to. I just want boundaries that leave no forwarding address." We both laughed at that, the way only tired people laugh, like it's medicine with side effects. A week passed. London cleared its throat into spring. Magnolia trees blossomed again. Ironic symmetry, considering how it all began. Then came another message, this time a voicemail, left after midnight. I recognized Dad's voice, even before the static stopped. "Sweetheart, your mother's not well. She barely eats. The stress is too much. Please call us back. We'll find a way to fix this together." The guilt they had rehearsed for decades returned like a familiar ghost, whispering, "You're cruel for seeking justice." I nearly deleted the message. Instead, I replayed it on loop until I noticed what was missing. Mom's voice. It was always her spearhead. Dad was the echo. Maybe she truly was ill, or maybe it was just another strategy. In the dictionary of manipulation, I told myself not to care, then failed beautifully at that promise. The next day, I called the family doctor back in Cedar Valley, an old neighbor named Dr. Lintz. He still answered his own phone. "She's fine as far as I know," he said. "She came in for a checkup last week. Blood pressure a bit high, but nothing dramatic. So the illness was emotional, convenient, and entirely theatrical." I almost admired the performance. By April, I had received the mediator's first letter. It recommended voluntary repayment to avoid court escalation and credit investigation. The sum, $38,000 plus interest. For the first time in our family's history, someone else held them accountable. It felt strange, satisfying but quiet, like justice served in a library. Then a small miracle happened. Shea emailed again. "Elena, Mom and Dad have agreed to pay half immediately. They want to arrange installments for the rest if you withdraw the complaint. Please consider this. No one wants lawyers. We're still family." The word family was doing so much heavy lifting, it should have applied for overtime pay. I reread the message 3 times. It sounded pragmatic, even reasonable, but the subtext screamed the same old pattern. "You fix the mess while we keep the moral high ground." I replied simply, "Full repayment documented. Then we talk. No signature, no love, no regards." A month later, a wire transfer hit my account, $17,500 USD, half of what they owed. The note read, "Partial settlement, Cross family. No apology, just arithmetic." Paula teased me. "See? Money speaks louder than their words ever will." But somewhere deep inside, disappointment hummed quieter than relief, because even in repayment, they were half-hearted. I left it untouched for weeks, not out of pride, but indecision. Was accepting partial payment another way of surrendering? The mediator pressed for updates. I sent copies of the transfer and requested review for pending balance. Bureaucracy takes its time, but justice moves forward, even if limping. That summer, London's air softened. On weekends, families picnicked along the Thames. Laughter floated from cafe terraces. One evening, I sat by the river, watching strangers share food, and realized I had been starving for connection that wasn't conditional. Maybe blood isn't responsibility. Maybe it's just biology with good PR. I took out my phone, deleted the family group chat that had slept in silence since last November, and added one new contact label for Paula, Chosen Family. It felt ceremonial, like re-editing my family tree with better roots. Still, late at night, I caught myself missing Shea, not for what she'd done, but for what she used to be before inheritance of favoritism poisoned her empathy. I drafted a message a dozen times and deleted every version. Closure doesn't always require sharing the door code. Then, without warning, my parents sent a letter by post. A real envelope, cream paper, handwriting unmistakably Dad's. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity betrayed me again. "Dear Eleanor, your mother says I should write because I still believe you're decent. We love you. We made mistakes. Yes. But family shouldn't drag family into legal trouble over misunderstandings. We hope you'll recall happier times and end this whole thing. Enclosed is a small token of goodwill." Dad, inside, was a personal check for $5,000. The gall of it made me laugh so hard, tears finally came, because that's when I understood, for them, forgiveness was always something that could be purchased, preferably at a discount. I tore the check into 4 perfect pieces and fed them to the river wind. They scattered like the magnolia petals back home, returning a debt I never chose. After the envelope incident, I expected silence. But silence has flavors, and this one was bitter and restless. The kind that prepares for another storm rather than accepts defeat. 2 weeks passed uneventfully. Then, one Thursday evening, Paula and I were leaving the hospital cafeteria when my phone buzzed. A Tennessee number again. "Don't," Paula said immediately. "I have to know," I sighed, stepping aside to answer. It was Shea this time, voice trembling. "Elena, please don't hang up. Can we talk like sisters for 1 minute?" I didn't answer, which she took as permission. "They froze Mom's account," she blurted. "Because of the investigation, she can't use her credit cards. They're panicking. Dad says, maybe if you withdraw everything now, we can send you the rest quietly." I breathed out, steady. "So you want silence in exchange for the remaining balance?" "I just want peace," Shea whispered. "They're still our parents." "No," I said softly. "They're your parents. I'm just the cautionary tale." She started crying, audibly, the same small sobs she used to fake at age 7 to avoid punishment. "Please, Lena, you don't know how bad it's gotten. Mom hasn't left her room in days." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I know, Shea. She's unwell whenever consequence appears." There was a pause. Then her tone hardened. "You've become cruel." I nearly laughed. "No, I've just stopped financing other people's kindness." I ended the call before she could respond. For the next hour, anger walked circles in my chest. But then it softened into sadness. Not for them. Those bridges were ash. But for myself. Families like ours trained us to believe decency means surrender. Learning otherwise felt like betrayal of muscle memory. That night, I opened my laptop again, added a short memo for the mediator confirming partial payment pending remainder. No emotion, just data. And with a single click, I freed myself from the need to be understood. Months slid by. Seasons stopped feeling like news. By autumn, I had moved to a new flat across the river. Smaller view, stronger peace. My life began to resume normal rhythms. Morning runs, late rounds at the hospital, Sunday markets where nobody knew my history. I loved the anonymity of fresh starts. Until one morning, while scrolling through news headlines before work, I saw a familiar name buried inside a regional article. Local woman hospitalized after fall at fundraiser. Elena Cross, 58. The photo was unmistakable. My mother, in a gold gown, smile tight, arm looped through my father's. According to the report, she'd collapsed during an auction dinner. The writer called it a minor fall likely due to stress. Stress. That word again, conveniently elastic. I stared at the screen for a long minute. Compassion wrestled with exhaustion and lost by points. I didn't call. I couldn't. A week later, a short email arrived. "Mom is recovering. She keeps asking about you." Shea. I read it twice, then deleted it. You can't nurse someone back to health while they're still addicted to hurting you. October arrived, dragging shorter days and longer clarity. I'd started writing short essays on burnout for a medical journal. Ironically, most of them were about boundaries disguised as productivity advice. The editor loved them. "You sound experienced," she said. I wanted to reply. I was trained by professionals, my parents. One afternoon, a final mediator statement landed in my inbox. Case closed. Full settlement received. At first, I didn't trust the words. I checked my bank. There it was, a transfer for the remaining $15,500. Note line, final repayment. No apology email, no call, no return address, just balance zero. I stared at the number until it blurred into meaninglessness. Then I laughed. Not out of joy, but relief's strange sibling. Closure doesn't roar. It exhales. I logged the mediator's confirmation in a folder labeled End of Story. Backed up twice. and closed my laptop. That evening, Paula brought over a bottle of sparkling wine. "To justice," she grinned. I raised my glass. "To receipts," I said, and we both burst out laughing. But endings are rarely final. 2 months later, right before Christmas, a small white envelope arrived with no return label. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Curling, careful, familiar. Inside was a single greeting card, embossed holly leaves, framing the words, "Merry Christmas." Beneath it, Mom's handwritten note. "We lost a lot this year. I hope you're happy. Love, Mom." Just like that. Accusation gift-wrapped as affection. I placed the card on my kitchen table, stared at it while the heater hummed against the London cold. Then I reached for my pen, and on the blank side, wrote one sentence. "Yes, I am. Finally." I slipped it back into the envelope and mailed it to their address in Cedar Valley. Closure, returned to sender. New Year's Eve arrived quiet, frost hugging the windows. Paula and a few colleagues had insisted I join their rooftop party, but I stayed home. Midnight came with fireworks that looked like things exploding into color, only to disappear. That's when I allowed myself to revisit everything. The blocked wedding, the betrayal, the accounts, the paper trail of exhaustion, all that pain, and yet here I was. Alive, solvent, free. It's funny what we inherit. My mother left me her sharp cheekbones and sharper guilt. My father gave me silence as conflict management. But maybe the best inheritance is learning what not to pass on. I whispered to the empty room, "The cycle stops here." A week into the new year, a message from an unknown number arrived. "Hi, Dr. Cross. My name is Naomi. I'm Shea's friend. She asked me to tell you she's moving abroad. She wanted to say she's sorry for everything." I read it twice, waiting for anger, but nothing came. Just a slow warmth, small but real. Maybe Shea had finally seen through the family fog. Or maybe she just wanted clean weather to start over. Either way, forgiveness didn't cost me anything anymore. I typed back one line. "I wish her peace." Sent. And something in my chest, silent for months, quietly unclenched. Spring returned almost imperceptibly that year. Morning light stretched earlier. Buses hummed with restless energy, and London smelled faintly of rain rather than regret. For months, I hadn't spoken my parents' names aloud. They existed like old debts cleared, but catalogued, useful only as reference material. Work consumed me in a gentler way now. Patience, lectures, research proposals, no hidden obligation waiting like a second job called family maintenance. I even started sleeping through the night, something I hadn't done since November in Tennessee. Yet closure, I discovered, is never an event. It's maintenance too. Some nights I dreamed of that barn venue, the double doors opening onto laughter I was excluded from. In those dreams, I wasn't angry anymore, just curious about what kind of person I might have been if love had come without invoices. One quiet Sunday, while browsing at a second-hand bookshop, my phone vibrated with a notification from an unfamiliar email address. Shea C. Subject, update. For a moment, my heartbeat tripped. Then I opened it. "Elena, I landed in Dublin last month. Colton and I separated. None of what happened between us or within the family feels survivable without change. You were right. Mom used to say, forgiveness runs in our blood, but I think it's boundaries we actually need. If you ever visit, I'd like to start again. No brides, no bills. Love, Shea." I reread the last line several times. It felt fragile, like a thread extended across an ocean, but genuine enough to risk touching. My reply was short. Boundaries sound better than forgiveness. I might take a train sometime. That night, I fell asleep with the window open, cold air carrying city noises that somehow felt like applause. Weeks passed. I almost forgot about Dublin until a brown parcel arrived. Return address S. Caldwell. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue, was a small silver locket, the same one I'd thrown away in that hotel trash bin. A note lay folded beneath it. Found it after the cleanup. Keep it this time. Maybe it means something different now. I held the locket in my palm for a long moment. It had scratches now, small and honest. Maybe it truly did mean something else. Proof that endings can return as beginnings when the story finally changes author. The following weekend, Paula and I met for brunch. She raised an eyebrow at the locket around my neck. Reconciliation, she asked. Redefinition, I said with a grin. She laughed. Spoken like someone who survived a whole soap opera with better writing. Maybe I just edited the script, I said. We toasted with coffee cups instead of champagne because real healing rarely sparkles. It steadies. Late that evening, I sat by the river again, journal in hand. For months, I'd written small private notes about compassion, debt, and lineage. Tonight, I wanted to close the file permanently, not with anger, but understanding. Lesson 1, love without boundaries is a blank check. Lesson 2, guilt is a leash disguised as affection. Lesson 3, sometimes you need distance to hear your own voice clearly. The breeze lifted pages as if curious. I smiled and added one more line at the bottom. Lesson 4, you can outgrow your origin story without rewriting your name. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number with +1's area code. Instinct told me not to answer. Curiosity still won. Dr. Cross. A man's voice asked politely. This is Mark Lewis from Cedar Ridge Events. I just wanted to confirm we received full compensation for last year's incident. I know it's none of my business, but the story went around town. People were proud someone finally stood up to that family. Guess I just wanted to say that. For a second, I couldn't speak. Small town gossip had returned not as humiliation, but as validation. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. After hanging up, I laughed into the dark. Imagine that. The girl once labeled too sensitive had become someone's quiet legend of resilience. A few months later, I took the train to Dublin. The city greeted me with salt air and unexpected warmth. Shea met me outside a corner cafe, holding 2 mugs of steaming chocolate instead of flowers. We hesitated, then hugged. Awkward, tentative, real. Up close, I noticed faint stress lines around her eyes. Evidence of late nights and maybe late regrets. She noticed the locket immediately. You kept it, she said. I did, I replied. This time, by choice. We talked for hours about small things. The weather, her new job, my research. Tiptoeing carefully around the crater called family. Only when we'd reached the second round of pastries did she whisper, Mom still hasn't forgiven me for choosing Ireland. I smiled gently. She never forgave me for choosing myself. We'll survive anyway. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like defiance. It felt like truth. The next morning, as I boarded the train back to London, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, lighter, unburdened. Behind me, Dublin slipped into morning mist. Somewhere beyond that horizon were 2 parents still telling a version of history where I was the villain. And maybe that's fine. Heroes are rarely recognized by the people who needed rescuing. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythmic hum of wheels on tracks drown out every old echo. Months later, on the anniversary of Shea's wedding, that infamous date that started everything, I mailed a small envelope to my parents' address. Inside was a single plain sheet of paper carrying only these words. Account settled. Daughter free, no signature. They'd know who it was from. Then I walked outside, feeling the crisp London spring on my face. and realized the story was truly over, not because justice had been served, but because I no longer required witnesses. I had rewritten the ending myself. Epilogue. Sometimes people ask, "Don't you regret cutting ties with your family?" And I answer, no. I regret waiting so long to believe my worth without their approval. Pain was the language I grew up speaking. Silence was the dialect they taught me. But truth. Truth became my accent the day I chose myself. And that, finally, was the price of freedom. $38,000 and one broken tradition. Honestly, a bargain.